When two worlds combine, it sparks into existence a brand new life of clarity and cosmic insight. This is the truest form of alchemy. Join Becky, Gregory, and Hillis Pugh on Cosmic Insight, only on Real Revolution Radio X.
Hello, Cosmic Explorers. This is Rebecca Gregory here with Cosmic Insight. Welcome you here to another show, and I'm going to bring on my fabulous host that co-creates this with me.
And I'm Hillis Pugh, and welcome to another edition of Cosmic Insight, where we expand your mind. And today we have the great honor and privilege of bringing on with us an author, scientist, or humanitarian, a person of all worldliness. Johan Calleman has a PhD in physical biology from the University of Stockholm, following which he was a senior researcher at the School of Public Health at the University of Washington in Seattle, focusing especially on identifying toxic substances in the human environment. After leaving his academic career, he has spent the past 25 years developing an understanding of the meaning of the Mayan calendar. And as a part of his quest, he has lectured in 25 countries, written 7 books, which have been translated into 14 different languages. He has also filmed the first interview with Don Alejandro Ochoa, head of the Council of Elders in Guatemala, available to an audience in the Western world. His current focus is on the application of the microcosm quantum theory in all its encompassing theory of evolution emanating from the studies. He has also presented at the theory of a place of psychedelics in human evolution and why they have the effects that they do. Carl, it is a pleasure and honor to reconnect with you and to have you on Cosmic Insight today. Welcome.
Thank you, Hillis. It's good to be with you again.
I think you need, oh, there you are.
Yeah, okay. Good to be with you again, Hillis.
Yes, it's such a pleasure to connect with you and to really explore even deeper about the quantum energy, these quantum theories, and to really see what's next for humanity. And I know that you wanted to really discuss today about the nature of consciousness and the future of humanity. So in your mind, what is the true nature of consciousness?
Yeah. So to begin with, that is a topic that is widely discussed today. I mean, the simple definition of consciousness, I would say, is simply the subjective experience. And what gives rise to an awareness of whatever goes on outside of yourself. Now, for a long time, that whole concept, that whole phenomenon of consciousness was something that was considered outside of the domain of science. It was looked upon as a non-physical phenomenon that really couldn't quite be explained. Now, what has happened in I would say, the 10 or 20 last years is that it still has come back. And it's now a heated topic of debate. What is it? And where does it come from? And how does it influence our perception of reality? And basically, there are 2 different schools of thought here. There is one school of thought, which is basically the school of thought of established science, of mainstream science, which basically says that consciousness is a product of the evolution of matter. In other words, that there's been an evolution of biological species giving rise to more and more complex brains. And at one point, when these brains become complex enough, they also become conscious, so that there is sort of somebody inside there that observes reality. Then there is the other school, and it includes, some scientists. It certainly includes old Vedic thought, a lot of religious thought and spiritual thought, according to which it is actually that consciousness is something fundamental. It's something that exists prior to anything else, and looks upon all evolution in a material sense, whether it's an evolution of the biological bodies, or if it's the evolution of the human mind, or any of these kind of things. It looks upon that as secondary phenomenon driven by consciousness evolution. And so in this worldview, the consciousness is the primary factor that drives all evolution. And I adhere to that view myself. The thing is, though, that the problem with that view, that consciousness is primary, is that it's been very hard to find any kind of verifying evidence that indicates that this is really the case. And so it's been more like philosophies of speculative philosophies and so forth, and rather than something that can be evidenced in a hard way. And so this is the issue, and there are two sides, and I think I have provided a lot of evidence myself to indicate that consciousness is actually a fundamental thing, and maybe the whole evolution of the universe is just about this coming into existence of conscious beings.
I love that explanation, and you definitely sparked a few questions in mind, but I know Rebecka has a few, so Rebecka, go ahead.
Oh no, I just kind of getting in I guess I'll go right into my question I had, talking about the consciousness and the levels that we're raising right now. And I was reading your book, The Quantum Sign of Psychedelics, and talking about the ninth wave and the pineal gland, and where we are and where we are moving. Our consciousness is moving into that field now. Something came across when I was reading about the pineal gland, was that, do you feel like the pineal gland might actually kind of like be like a seed, moving us into that consciousness, as kind of like the plants and the genomes of the plants, how they're all connected in the underground system, how we are moving into that consciousness of being all connected, and that the pineal gland can be that connection to the cosmos on that macrocosmetic level?
Yeah, I do. I do think that the pineal gland is sort of in a sense, almost like an antenna that downloads cosmic information. I look upon the pineal gland essentially as the center of the mind, and and I'm also basically sharing the old view of the French philosopher René Descartes, who would say that the pineal gland is the meeting point of soul and body. I would say that there is, suppose that one of the things I'm believing and have sustained in different evidence is that the mind is not produced by our brain. The mind is something that we download from the cosmic center. And but then, if that is true, there must be some kind of an organ in the brain that because there is a geometry to the mind, and there must be some kind of a place, some kind of a point that places the mind in exactly the right place in the brain in order for it to organize the brain in such a way that that we function, our thinking it becomes coherent and so forth. But I look upon it then as, in the same sense, it's like a chain of relays that goes from the pineal gland to the center of the earth, to the center of the heliosphere, the center of the sun, and then to the center of the galaxy, and then finally up until the center of the universe, what some people would talk about as the central sun. And so I think it's a connecting point, but it's a critical connecting point because it really connects then our brains with our minds.
Got it. Thank you for that information. It totally makes sense to me in that, because so it's almost what you're kind of saying. It's almost like the anchor point in the cosmos of our own beingness, our own physical part connecting to the spirit or soul or that evolutionary part of us.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and you know what it kind of sparks in my mind is that when you first mentioned about the little person in the brain, and it brought to my attention, like, could the little person in the brain be the pineal gland? Could it be this seed, this mechanism, this organ or organism that's organizing our thoughts, organizing our energy, organizing and directing us in this grand universe of ours? So the little person in the brain, are you referring to the pineal gland, or is there something much more?
I couldn't hear your last sentence there. I heard until your last sentence. Could you repeat the question? Just the sentence.
Sure. So is the pineal gland the little person in the brain, or is it something more?
Oh, something more. I think mostly it's an anchoring point, but that anchoring point of the mind is so important because based on that anchoring point, we will divide segments of our brains into the left and the right hemisphere, and to the frontal lobes and the parietal lobes. And these different compartments of the brain have different functions, and they interact with each other, and all that whole phenomenon is what creates our thinking and our perception of the world and how we create and so forth. All of that is dependent on this particular compartmentalization of the brain into left, right, front, back, and many other compartments as well. And now, if the pineal gland is the center of that compartmentalization, then it means that it will have very, very versatile functions and mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, because as you're saying this and how it's referencing and connecting to the galaxy and the universe that we're living in, and what comes to my mind readily is the Fibonacci sequence, or the Fibonacci design, and how it overlays to the brain. And so if you think of it in reference to our galaxy, for those who are watching, just visualize the galaxy and how it's this spiral, and how that spiral energy, and in the center of that spiral energy is us, is our solar system, or close to the center as you can get to our solar system, to us. And so when you put that and you have the overlay of the Fibonacci over the brain, it's the exact same shape and sequence. And so when you say how important that is, and how it regulates and how it disseminates and information, what is the the versatility, what's the unlimited potential in your thoughts and in your research and in your theory of this little seed in our mind?
Yeah, the potential, one of the things that, this, what you're bringing up leads to many different avenues, you might say, to pursue. As I mentioned, the pineal gland is really like an anchoring point for a certain kind of geometry. And that geometry is partly it's just the separation in hemispheres and so forth. But then almost certainly the human mind also, as part of its geometry, has the Fibonacci numbers, or actually more the golden mean, the golden ratio. That's part of the I would say of the cosmic mind. The golden ratio is a part of the cosmic mind. It's part of organizing reality in many different ways. And but then there is also the when I mentioned this mind as being downloaded from the cosmos, it has different forms. And I go back essentially to the Mayan calendar, which is a kind of the only, I should say, quantum calendar of our planet. And the first one, of course, but also the only one that looks upon evolution as being created by 9 different quantum states, 9 different geometries of the mind, you might say. And the result of that it's not just one geometry that has always dominated the human beings. There was one particular geometry that was downloaded 5,100 years ago when the so-called 6th wave of the Mayan calendar was activated. And that created civilization. And it had a particular structure. It was the first time then that a geometry, a perpendicular geometry, was downloaded into the human brain. And according to the Maya, who talked about this in quite some detail, it was a shift taking place in the cosmic center. But then that was also transposed to the human environment of our particular planet. So we're one of the many planets everywhere that have been downloaded that geometry. And that download has had enormous consequences. And one of the most obvious things I would say is that it was the first time then that straight and perpendicular lines were downloaded. And what happened as a result of that was that for the first time people started to build pyramids. And pyramids is not only in Egypt, even though those are the most majestic ones, but also in Sumeria, in Mongolia, in Peru, and several other different locations at this particular point in time. And it illustrates that once people downloaded a mind with this kind of geometry, they started to project it onto the world outside of them. And that meant that they built pyramids, they built cities, they organized time and space. So they started to use calendars, they started to write, and many other things. And this was a consequence of a particular new quantum state, a new geometry of the mind that they projected onto the world. And then that is, however, not the only such quantum state or state of consciousness, you might say, because it's been since the beginning of time, there's been a sequential activation of different geometries, of different quantum states. And as people have downloaded them, their perception of the world has changed, and they have also then changed their creativity. And so it's a bigger picture. It's where it has to be included that throughout its existence, the mind of humanity has not been the same. There's been one state of consciousness was activated about 100,000 years ago. And that wasn't structured, but it gave people some kind of a spirituality. People started to create art. You start to find cave paintings and certain other things. But the people then, in the first, up until 5,000 years ago, they were completely different from what they became in 5,000 years ago when the new structured mind was downloaded. And then there are all of these levels, all of these different quantum states that each one deserves a detailed study and explanation. But I think that is, if we want to understand evolution and understand the evolution of consciousness in particular, and how that drives all aspects of human life, then, you know, an important starting point is to recognize that it has like a pyramidal structure. It's like 9 levels of creation. And depending on when a certain human being has been living, he or she has been dominated by a particular geometry or particular quantum state, and has her philosophies and ways understanding their existence have changed with these different levels.
Yeah, that's a lot for us to process.
So, Carl, we're in the 9th wave now, correct?
Well, we're in all of the waves.
All the waves simultaneously?
Yes, they're all running in parallel.
Okay.
But you might say since 2011, they're all running in parallel. And before that year, the 9th wave wasn't accessible. The last one became accessible in 2011, the 9th wave. Okay. So it's not like the 9th wave replaces the others. It's more like a pyramidal structure where it stands upon all the others. And yes, but yes, that is a significant influence on our life, that particular wave.
And that influence right now that's coming in with the 9th wave, as we move through all these other waves that we've been conformed by our belief systems around, the 9th wave is more into unity consciousness, correct? So we're in that parallel right now of moving in those two different, not two, I'm not saying, you know, all the different waves, but moving more into that 9th wave consciousness if we choose to go into that.
Yes, exactly. And but to some extent, I think, first of all, it requires an intention to do so. And also, you know, once you have the intention, it's really not something that just sort of automatically you're just taken over by a new wave. You'll have to cultivate it, and you have to seek it, I would say. But these changes, you know, these waves, they're activated at certain points in time. They, in principle, become accessible at certain points in time. But then not everyone will go along with it. It's just a potential, just a possibility, so to speak. So, if we go back to 5,000 years ago, which is a good example because we have some historical knowledge of the rise of civilizations, then yes, in certain locations in the world, in the Indus Valley, in Egypt, in Sumer, where there was already big populations having developed agriculture, when they downloaded this new structured mind, they just went ahead and built cities and pyramids and all that kind of stuff. But most of the world did not. There are no pyramids in northern Siberia because there was just too few people there to create a civilization, and they did not have the agricultural basis and so forth. So there is some kind of an interaction there. Even if people built pyramids 5,000 years ago, both in Peru and in Mongolia, completely independently, they got the idea of building pyramids completely independently of the Egyptians or the Sumerians. This doesn't mean that it happened everywhere. And so it's taken a long time for civilization, for instance, to spread across the world. And but it also comes, I think, with some kind of an insight that in certain ways life became better with the civilizations. It's not that simple, because what came with civilization was also a lot of oppression, a lot of duality, like when people get dominated by a yin-yang polarity of a light-darkness, they will tend to project that onto the world. Mm-hmm. And so they will say, some people are good, that's the ones I see through the light. Some people are bad, that's the ones that I see through the darkness. And as this is a mind that comes from the cosmic center, they think this is the way things are. Mm-hmm. So when you study civilization for the past 5,000 years, you will find a tremendous amount of inequality, racism, suppression of women, and slavery and what have you, because really these kind of social relationships depend on projections of the human beings, and everybody basically have shared them. So it's not to say that civilization is good or something like that. On the other hand, yes, there are good aspects of it. People started to create science, good art, and et cetera, and certainly over time, life became more comfortable based on all of these technical advances that came out of a structured mind. So, yeah, I should come back to where you started, that about the ninth wave, that it became, a wave becomes accessible, but then it will take a long time, or maybe a long time, I don't know, but historically speaking, it has taken some time before it becomes widespread. And part of it is people seeing that there could be some kind of a value for themselves in developing a lifestyle or practices that will help them access and assimilate this new state of mind. In the case
of collecting crystals.
Galactic crystals, you said?
I said like collecting crystals.
Yeah. And that's really what it is. And anyway, at the current time, the ninth wave is really something that is about accessing directly from the divine source, a shared mind. So it's not really about the individual having an interest in it, in the way that we have learned to live our lives. And that makes it a little bit of a challenge. It certainly is something that is to have that kind of a shared unity state of consciousness that is accessed from the divine source. It certainly is something of great value to the planet, to our unity, to the big scale of things. But it's not just something that we will just automatically get to by our own individual desires or so forth. So it will take an intention, maybe even a commitment to do so. And it will take a time, I would say, because as we said, the other waves are still running in parallel. They're still there. Many people are completely immersed in these kind of still dualist thinking, inequality, and all these kind of things. Whereas a minority maybe is finding its way and recognizing that this will not work. And we will have to access the wave and the state of consciousness that is unified, that unifies us. And yeah.
So Carl, just for clarification for those who are watching who have not read any of your books before, so what you're saying here, a wave that runs parallel to another wave, these dimensional energies that we can have access to assist us in the evolution of self, the mind, the body, and our soul in essence, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Excellent. And so my question to you is that I know that we are in the 9th wave now where we can access this unity, this allness energy. But is there anything beyond the 9th wave? Is there going to be a 10th or 11th or 12th wave of energies coming in?
Yeah, I've had that question several times before. I don't think so, because at the current point in time, unity must be the highest level, I would say. So I wouldn't, any kind of state of consciousness that would tend to separate us would not be constructive, I would say. And when I say I would say, then I'm trying to put myself in the mind of whoever created this universe. Yeah. And so, but I'm just trying to do that. And of course, that's a limited aspect. So that's part of why I don't believe there is more than 9 waves. The second thing is the number 9 itself, and how in the land of the Maya, which is a special ancient tradition, you might say, they would build their pyramids predominantly, or at least the significant pyramids that they would build were built in 9 levels. And they were built in such a way that you could climb them. And the climbing then was a way of enacting the evolution of the universe, if you like. You were just following the number of quantum leaps that the universe has gone through. And that's just 9. And this 9 is also something that you find in many other different traditions, and as being a number of completion. And and just take the example of our own decimal system. The highest single digit number is 9. Mm-hmm. That's probably not an accident. And then you move to 10, and then you have 2 digits, and then it goes up to 19 and 20 and so forth. So I think there is only 9. But then I also think that the 9th wave can lead you very deeply, very far ahead, and I don't think there will be a running out of evolution potential. I think it has the potential for that.
Beautiful.
That is
Thank you for
beautiful.
sharing that information.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the energy of that, what I'm getting is my mind just went blank for a second. I got
Even to you.
from reading your book earlier today and now this, I'm just like I'm download overload right now.
Yeah, okay.
Moving into the ninth, in the energy, I guess you could say, as the ninth dimension, the Mayan calendar is set up in waves. So within that, are there different dates that as it moves on? Because I know they use tones, correct, and vibrational as their measurements in their calendar. Is that correct?
Could you repeat the question? If there are measurements, yes, there is definitely
I guess
date.
what I'm getting at as we go through the evolution of moving into this ninth waves, parallels in the parallel worlds of all the other waves, is the calendar matched up with certain dates or things as the wave of the calendar moves through in connection to the different tones they have and the signals that they have on their calendar? Anything like for the future that you feel that's coming up in the calendar? I guess what I'm asking.
Yeah.
The wave of the calendar itself.
Yeah,
I think I got that.
Absolutely. And that's really the reason I think I, as a scientist, have focused in on the Maya. You can study ancient philosophies from all kinds of cultures all over the world. A lot of people today would still base themselves on the Indian tradition, in the Vedic tradition, and so forth. But there is something special that makes the Maya special, at least for me, and that's the fact that they developed calendars, and calendars means numbers, and numbers means science in the modern sense of the word. And so if you have numbers, and then you can match those numbers, or actually dates, numbered dates, so to speak, and you can match those numbers with the kind of changes that you see in the evolution of the universe, then you actually have something that can be tested by science. And does it match? Does these shift points in the calendar, in the waves, which are numbers then really, does that match what we know happened from our study of history and biological evolution and so forth? And I would ascertain that there is massive evidence. It's just that people have not paid attention to it, but there is massive evidence that there is a match between these numbers, between these shift points in time, and the what we know happened in history. So, and that is to me what makes the Maya unique, because if you read, say, the Vedic scriptures, and they would talk about divinities and the consciousness as primary and so forth, but it just stays as philosophy because there are no numbers in there, and you cannot test it, so to speak. Does it really match things, or is it just a philosophy? The Maya, in that sense, it's a special people that creates a bridge for ourselves, as modern humans, with the ancient philosophies.
And that's amazing. They were able to create that calendar so far back in time that is still relating to today's time and everything that's happened in the world. So it's fascinating to me that following it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I love that too, because you have what people will call ancient wisdom and how we are able to access it and apply it to today's time. And speaking of applying that knowledge to today's time, what future, or how do you see humanity evolving and growing in these times? Because we just had this really big cosmic event, and there's going to be a lot more cosmic event in the coming months and years ahead. But what does having the most recent one signal to you about the future of humanity?
Yeah, so the analysis of the future is complicated by the fact that there are several different waves running in parallel, and meaning that the kind of effects that they have will be different depending on what wave you're looking at. And so whatever happens in the future is really a product of the interference pattern of all these different waves. And that makes it more difficult. And there's so many different aspects of this. The way I would approach is really then is to go through a couple of these different waves by themselves and see what does this wave indicate is going to happen, and what do the other waves indicate is going to happen. And when it comes to the sixth wave, which is the one that created civilization, it is now going down into what you might talk about as a dark age. It's which does have a lot of negative aspects to it. Previously in history, humanity, pandemics have come in dark ages, just as an example. It's also that the dark ages are not the ones that have the most forward movement, that creates the most new thinking or anything like that. But it also means, the fact that the sixth wave, as I mentioned earlier, was the wave that created duality, inequality, and suppression and dominance and all these kind of things. Now, if that goes into a dark age, it means that that dominance, that separation also goes out. And this is a 400-year-long process, the sixth wave, and I think we're coming to a time when the Western dominance is coming to an end, because in the previous peak in this wave, it was the West that came to dominate the world, and now that is turning into a valley in the wave, and that Western dominance is coming to an end. And I think that's pretty easy to see in many ways. Not the least the fact that this pandemic has disproportionately negatively affected the Western hemisphere much more than the Eastern. But any kind of change in these waves will usually have both a negative and a positive side, and it does depend on what is it that you want to go by, so to speak. And so in this case, I would say, when it comes to the sixth wave, we are losing some of the forward movement of civilization. And on the other hand, maybe that's a good thing, maybe it is this relentless forward movement of civilization that has destroyed so much of the earth and has that has in the long term, of course, threatens the survival of the human species. Similarly, with the seventh wave, it's been, I don't know if I should go into that, because it's all this, there's almost the question, how much can people grasp in this kind of a talk that we're having, and I shouldn't overload people. But on the other hand, just going back to the ninth wave, it's not a dualist wave. It's really something that comes on top of all the evolution that humanity has gone through up until this point. And that holds a new potential that didn't exist before 2011. And that potential is, again, one of a unified state of consciousness. And what that means, I mean, if you think about it, if you think about the state of consciousness as a filter, and that the filter is to us like the water is to the fish, then as long as people are dominated by these filters, they will think this is reality, and if they're living in a dualist reality with a separation between yin and yang dominating their mind, then they will project that. And in social relationships, it will result in dominance, but it also will result in dominance versus nature, the suppression of nature. And so only if this shifts do I think there will really be a potential for letting the earth, the plants or the animals come back. This kind of a consciousness is not one that is supportive of dominance, either of others or of nature. And so this dominance that comes from the sixth wave, then the civilizational wave, it's in a sense then it's being deactivated, and that I believe is also a great hope for humanity. And but as I also said before, these states of consciousness need to be cultivated. They need to be intended, and that's the first step. It's the first step is for everyone to ask themselves, do they want that kind of perception of reality as non-dualist? And to the extent that that is at hand, and people choose such a path, then there is a path to creating heaven on earth, because ultimately what we create comes out of our states of consciousness. That's the way I look upon it anyway.
I have a question that came to me. It's bringing in the virus that's among us right now.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the virus is brought to us as that, what you were talking about, the consciousness and the duality, because there are those that want to destroy the virus, and I believe there's those that want to become allies and knowing how to move forward as part of our DNA and upgrading us to the next level of evolution. What are your thoughts around that in the virus and the duality of it, where we are as a consciousness around it, and where you what you feel about it?
Yeah.
What it's doing.
Well,
our
yeah.
leveling.
Well, overall, it's kind of strange, because if you look at medical science in general, since I would say 1940 or something like that, it became recognized that psychological factors, or you might even say spiritual factors, but psychological factors like stress and others, such factors could have a big influence on how human diseases, how severe they would get. And so since about 100 years then, there is a realization that mind and body are connected, and that it's an interchange between the two. And now this is, that's the whole basis of what some people would call spiritual healing, that, you can heal by removing some kind of psychological factors and so forth through various kinds of processes that I'm not an expert on, but I do know that that's a common thing. There's a lot of people that make their living on doing these kind of things. Now, what is strange though, or curious when it comes to this virus and the pandemic, is that suddenly, even this is all known, that there is a psychological factor to the onset of diseases. Suddenly, nobody considers the fact that there might be an existential, non-physical background to people succumbing to this particular virus in the world. And so, part of the reason, I just mentioned the fact that the Western dominance of the world is now going down. And part of that, I think, is create some kind of an existential dilemma or upset in people in the West, which would probably include all of us. And which is then, if you look at the world, there's like 100 times more deaths per capita in the US compared to China. Mm-hmm. And yet it started in China. And you will find the Eastern Hemisphere much, much relieved, not totally, but basically by a comparison. And I think then that has to do with these overall shifts in consciousness that makes people more susceptible in the West. And what I also loosely talked about, the fact that on one level, and I should emphasize, it's just on one level that we're entering what you might talk about as a dark age, that is a little bit of an invitation for it produces a terrain in the human body for the germs to act on, so to speak. So I don't think we should look upon it as the effects of this pandemic or virus. I don't think we should look upon it as just a sort of a physical factor causing it. We should, those that want to understand its background would also include a bigger picture of what is happening on the level of consciousness.
Beautiful. That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And it actually brought to mind how, not just the virus, but how everything in our life is brought to our attention and our consciousness in the energetic field in a way that really resonates with whatever thought we are having, whether it's a fear-based thought or a love-based thought.
Yeah.
And everything in between. And so, you being a scientist and researcher of quantum energy and quantum theories, is there like any science really now to back any of this up, and how our energy and how our body responds to our thoughts and consciousness?
Okay. Well, I wouldn't feel that I would be qualified to quite go into that. It's yeah. Let me just say that. What you're proposing may very well be exactly right. I suspect also there's a lot of people working on it on the sidelines of science, but I should just refrain from entering something I don't know anything about.
Well, I guess in essence, yeah, it does exist. It does happen, but there's yet to be enough factual data, if you will, to really say, to give more of a depth of an answer.
Exactly. Yeah. That's part of my scientific nature. If there's not data, I will try to stay away.
Well, maybe you can have one of your buddies in that field reach out to us, because I mean, we want to see the data, because us being energy practitioners, we know on an energetic level that this, our consciousness affects what we do and manifests in physical ways, and
Yes.
how we attract certain experiences through our consciousness, whether it be the pandemic or something else,
Yeah.
whether it's, stubbing our toe. But it would be fun to see the actual data and
Okay.
how it all comes together.
I will think about it.
Yeah, and different consciousnesses. And you also talked a lot about, psychedelics and the altered state and how they're helping with the consciousness of going into those other levels
Yeah.
of exploration, I guess you could say, of where we consciously can connect to.
Yeah.
And are you finding those altered states are really, I know I personally do plant medicine myself, and but I've also, it was funny with me when when I had my ayahuasca experience, I had actually the most profound experience doing breath work, just using the breath. But I've been shown, with the plant medicine and the energies there and the different energies and how our consciousness can change just within ourselves of moving forward and connecting at a different level, bringing ourselves to be in that alignment state of who we are.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to psychedelics, I mentioned how 5,000 years ago, people downloaded a structured mind and built pyramids and also created societies based on inequality and dominance and so forth. And now what I think psychedelics do is really that they interact with the brain in such a way as this structured mind is disconnected, temporarily, of course. And what that means is really the possibility of making some kind of a reset. We in a normal state of consciousness, we're stuck in a rut, basically. Most of us in one way or another, some in addiction, some in depression, some in whatever, and it's sort of just repeating, because the structure of the mind has frozen those habits in a particular compartment. And it doesn't really matter who you talk to, because you're still in that structured mind that doesn't allow for the decompartmentalization of the brain, and which opens up the new possibilities. And so I think then there is, and of course it's not based on my work, but on many others whom I quote, who scientists or therapists that are working with psychedelics that have found that they actually are very often beneficial in towards depression and addiction and so forth. And it's because it's sort of, at least for a short period of time, you remove that structure that you have been stuck in, and then of course the structure will come back after the use of the psychedelic, but then even so you will go back to a world where you saw some possibility in this unstructured mind, and you saw maybe the possibility of unstructuring, unfeathering that rut that you had been stuck in. And in this regard, I think the psychedelics is a very powerful and a little bit unique. Some people say you can accomplish the same thing through meditation and breath work and so forth. And yes, I would say you probably can. But the thing with psychedelics is that they sort of lock you into this non-structured mind for a certain point of time. And whatever you like at that point in time, and maybe you won't like it, but whatever you like, there's no way out of it. You will be faced to see some possibility that that might escape you otherwise. With most other kinds of what shall I say, techniques for spiritual development or personal development or so forth.
It takes that ego state away, so you're able to look at other possibilities of the world and integrate that into your worlds.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Hillis looks like he wants to say something.
Hillis.
Oh.
He's like,
I'm just taking it all in because, every time I sit with you, even though this is our second time, I always have a lot to come away with. I have a lot of thoughts to really process and really how to move forward in a scientific manner.
Great.
Having the evidence and the data and collecting everything and bringing it all in. And now I'm in that space of processing. And so, Carl, it has been a wonderful, joyous time to spend with you. Unfortunately, right now we're just about out of time. It always saddens me, when we, run out of time when we have these great exchanges. But Carl, where can people find you? Where can people buy your book? Where can people find out more about you?
Thank you, Hillis. It's been great to be with you and Rebecka. And I think you have complemented each other very well. My books are, you can buy them in principle anywhere where they sell books. But today that means online mostly. And of course, it includes Amazon.com. But also the publisher Inner Traditions that have published most of my recent books. In addition to that, there is my webpage, calleman.com, www.calleman.com. And there is information also about courses and events, and also some kind of a basic coherent outline of the macrocosmic quantum theory that you can familiarize yourself with. That's where I would go. I have a couple of Facebook pages as well, but I think it's more coherently presented on my webpage.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carl.
Thank you, Hillis.
And
Thank you.
We will connect with you again very soon, my friend.
Hope so.
Yes, Carl. Thank you so much for honoring us today. I went up the rabbit hole a couple days with you, so I'm still integrating everything I've been reading. So fascinating. So thank you for doing the work that you do. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for joining us for this special guest of Cosmic Insight. I think I'm vortexing here. I'm information overload. I'm done.
So thank you everyone for thank you everyone. No, I'll say thank you everyone for tuning in.
Yes.
And until next time.
But heard instead, dear listeners, through podcast radio on realrevolutionradio.com. Never before has inspirational podcast radio been taken to this next level of wow. Until now. Today, in the age of information, more and more people are searching for answers and in solutions in how to better approach and perceive every day-to-day concerns by tuning in to realrevolutionradio.com. Isn't it about time we take back our lives, back in consciousness, in a higher state of awareness, in the evolution of our own state of higher well-being? Yes, we can do so consciously every day by tuning in to the many groundbreaking and third eye-opening podcasts. Our new Cleveland-based network of over 33 paradigm-shifting internet talk shows. Only on RealRevolutionRadio.com. Be part of that change. Evolve. Be inspired.